Hey guys, Rob from Georgia here with you. It is week 12 or episode 12, however you want to look at it. A Schizophrenic Synopsis where James and I take a look at a pair of films and have a unique angle. And this week is no different as we look at a couple, I think they're both rightly in their own way, unique ways. We can refer to them as classics in their own right. They both bring something unique to the genre, and I'm referring, of course, to The Thing from 1982, as well as The Descent from '05, Neil Marshall's film. And the unique twist that each bring, of course, is one brings an all-female cast, and the other one, as we know, brings an all-male cast. Of course, John Carpenter's The Thing, and so it'll be my duty, seems a bit blasphemous, that I even should take a few minutes to utter a few words of what I consider maybe the greatest horror sci-fi film maybe ever. It is definitely at the top of my top 5 and interchanges with Jaws here and there, depends on my mood, but if you just think about all the memorabilia and everything I have of The Thing, it really should be in my top spot, but it fluctuates with Jaws. So The Thing, John Carpenter. We're going to talk specifically to this idea of an all-male cast, but first, since this film is a classic in its own right, it needs just to be said a few things. The cast, of course, we all know. Kurt Russell as McCready. Wilfred Brimley as Blair, Keith David as Childs, Richard Masur as Clark, Donald Moffat as Gary, and the list goes on and on and on. But in an important, besides respecting the film and highlighting the cast, it also strikes at the core of John W. Campbell's original novella, Who Goes There, from 1938, and which case, unlike The Thing from Another World, Carpenter's Thing goes back to the original short story, and among many things, the shape-shifting nature of the alien. It also takes a real strong nod towards the cast in terms of names that we can find right off the pages of the original novella. As well as this film is a perfect storm of just all the right personalities at the right time. If you think of Bill Lancaster as the principal writer and the nods that he takes from the original novella, Stuart Cohen, David Foster, Larry Franco, of course, as producers, Ennio Morricone, of course, with John Carpenter, brings the score, the phenomenal, very atmospheric score. Dean Cundy, of course, returns cinematographer with John. Todd Ramsey as editor, and John J. Lloyd, of course, production designer. And there are more and more and more and more and more. But these names ought to be mentioned just because. Well, first of all, this is the Arrow copy of The Thing, just one of many versions I have. What I was going to say is Rob Bottin, of course, fresh off The Hallowing and his little success with The Fog, he will, really step onto the big stage with the work that he will pour into the special effects, the makeup, creature effects, designs, whatnot, into The Thing. The Thing is Rob Bottin, and Rob Bottin is The Thing. The Thing is not The Thing as we know The Thing to be if Rob Bottin is not part of this huge package. And when I say this is a perfect storm of the right people in the right time to bring this about. Because if you think about this film for just a minute, I've been revisiting it. I've been looking at some of the extras on the Arrow copy, the Scream Factory copy. And one of the things that's often said about this film is it's still 1982. It still clearly is head and shoulders above many films even today in terms of special effects, story, atmosphere, just the whole story behind the shooting of the film. Up in Alaska, of course, and some of the things, the interiors being dealt with on the studio. and the manipulation of just creating a cold atmosphere. It's a perfect storm of 1982 of bringing together. This has got to be the high tide of special effects, handcrafted special effects. In the era of special effects, I think one has to say this film, some of these effects, man, are unparalleled even in filmmaking today. It just nothing comes close to some of the sequences that were created for this film. But anyways, an all-male cast. You know what? When you talk about an all-male cast, I mean, you do have to consider John Campbell's original intent and the very, very original germ, the thing that probably got him kick-started on the novella was being brought up. His mom had a twin sister who the two were so closely alike that sometimes he didn't know the difference between his mom and his aunt, and it freaked him out. And so there's this issue of identity, the loss of identity, and not knowing who one is or the other, and the fear of loss, the fear of losing our identity to something else, the fall of the flesh being overcome by a virus or something within. A lot has been said about the AIDS epidemic just coming into the scene as this film is made. The hidden enemy that kills or takes over within. You know, the dynamics of humor as it's played out, written in a very Hawksian way, of course. One of the few nods that John, being a huge fan, student of Howard Hawks, didn't really set out to remake a film, but more or less set out to turn his attention to the original source material, but pay a nod here and there to Howard Hawks, of course, whom he studied in film school at USC. And of course, I happen to have a copy of The Thing from Another World, 1951, that has John Carpenter's signature commentary track on it, which is just phenomenal to listen to. But anyways, to take an all-male cast and you're dealing with issues of identity, the loss of identity, you're talking about the issue of just a hierarchy of characters, men who are isolated at this Antarctic, this outpost in Antarctica, these scientists who have sort of just, this is, for some of them, I think this is their last stand in life. This is just where they're at in life. And so, you know, you go from the very, I think it's terms of leadership, raw in, you know, leadership, you go from McCready right down to Palmer, and you get a nice spectrum of just where all these people seem to fit in their unique places and how they bounce off of each other and work with each other and learn to understand. And even in the making of the film, there was moments, huge moments of time where they actually had to bunk up with each other, you know, up there in Alaska, in an environment that is very reminiscent of, say, soldiers in basic training or whatnot. So a lot of vibe, a lot of what we get off screen is genuine in the sense of how they were learning to relate to one another and how the writing of the script was starting to be seen through their characters. And of course, you know, McCready's very quiet, subtle ascension to leadership over Gary is another interesting layer of this film. But you have this unseen enemy that has gotten within the ranks, and it's starting to not only take each one over, but pitting one against another. There's a trust issue in here. And so I think, you know, the idea that you have an all-male cast without any females in it is an interesting experiment in to see how people, men, relate to one another in this type of circumstance. It is an apocalyptic film. It is when these men come to the full realization that if they don't stand up to the plate and do something, regardless of their character flaws, the world is in jeopardy. And so this is humanity's last stand. And, you know, I'm not against at all the integration of a female into the cast, but in terms of seeing how this played out through John's vision as director and Lancaster's writing, and how these men bring these characters to life, it does bring a unique sense of vibe and atmosphere, and just how you see this played out that, quite frankly, would be a lot different if there would have been a woman written into the script. Now, Howard Hawks, of course, had not one, but I think at least two major females, if not a few other in the background in The Thing from Another World. Meredith, I can't think of her name right off the top of my head. But you know, at the forefront of a very strong female lead, Howard Hawks was, that was one of his signature marks as a director. And John was, you know, he understood this. But this film was going to be something different. This film was going to be, John Campbell had remarked on The Thing from Another World back in the day. He was asked by Howard Hawks whether he liked it. And he says, you know, his response was, as a film, I'm sure it's a great film. It's a good film. He says, but it's not my story. And that's where we part ways with John's film, and his vision is to return into the original source novella for inspiration. And in fact, if you read the original novella, if you've never read it, even with the 2011 thing, The Thing from Another World, John Carpenter's vision, there is still stuff in there untapped, which is remarkable considering how short of a novel it is. It's an amazing thing here. But this idea of bringing an all-male cast, having them isolated, you know, a contained film, you know, in where they have to deal with not only an exterior threat, an internal threat, and how you see this dynamics work out with a bunch of through a bunch of men in close quarters, is an interesting experiment. I think it's just one of many reasons why this film endures and is hailed as a classic. In which case, when it first came out, it was anything but, if you know the story of it. And so thankfully, for those of us who love this film and have just enjoyed the years that have passed and just loving on this film, one of the qualities, innate qualities that bring this film, or makes this film what it is its male cast. It's all male cast. Now, this might not work in every film that's attempted, but in this case, in this film, I think it works beautifully. And with this, The Descent, as James will spend some time with, there is another interesting set of dynamics that are played out, but within, you know, another contained film, I guess, more or less, but with all-female cast, which is, I'll leave it to him, but I can't wait to hear what he has to say. But, you know, just approaching this film and just, you know, I don't know how many people even really sit there. You know, if you were to sit down for the first time, and I can't imagine this, but put this movie in for the very first time ever, not realizing what you're getting into, I wonder if you would ever even think halfway in or a quarter of the way in, 3/4 of the way in, you know, there's no women in this movie. I wonder, it's that good of a movie, it's that well written. You may get to the end of the movie and suddenly go to yourself, wait a minute, you know, I don't think there was any women in this movie. But it's an interesting experiment. And John, I'm thankful that he had a vision, and even this was his first major big studio you know, film. I'm glad that the studio gave him enough respect to let him follow it, see it through. So with this week, just a cross comparison of two films that showcase an all gender cast. We'll see what James has to say, but week 12, of course, The Thing from John Carpenter, perhaps one of the greatest horror films ever in the history of horror films. I count it an absolute extreme honor and privilege to even spend a few minutes talking about it. As always, we end these things off with Go Bills.